Welcome to Books Boys, live from the Grand Library, TheDean and PJ.
He's PJ.
Hello to everyone.
I'm TheDean, and we are the Books Boys.
The one and only.
This is the Books Boys show. Get it? Buy it? Books.
Books. Still
Now,
confused
this
what
month,
books are, but okay.
Well, we don't know about the books. We're getting fewer emails every month asking us what on earth we're talking about. So
Okay.
I think that's a good sign. Either that means that the kids now they know what books are, or they've just stopped trying to figure it out. You know, one of the two.
Right, yeah, one or the others, yeah. Something related to toilet paper. But anyway, yeah,
Could be.
okay. So whatever it is, we're going to talk about it.
We're going to talk about them, and we're joined this month in the webcam sessions by a Aladdin's lamp. So anyone who wants to make some wishes, get on the webcam chat, which no one's invited to, by the way, so you can't get on there.
So I'm afraid not. No, that's very special VIP. Us two only at the moment. So there you go. There you go.
How are you, PJ? How's things?
I'm doing very well, yeah. I'm just sitting here drinking some ginger tea, having a very enjoyable day, and talking with you about life.
Very nice. I'm on the Lapsang Souchong tea today. Went and bought some there, so it's very smoky tea.
Oh, very fancy. Very fancy.
For a smoky episode. Well, guys, this is episode 5 of the Books Boys, and you know it's been less than 4 weeks since we last recorded, and it feels like 3 months ago. I don't understand what is happening with the flow of time.
I know it feels like a long time ago. Well, it's because I think we usually talk about life and books anyway once a week or twice or whatever, and I don't think we've hardly talked this month. I've been a bit kind of busy with my own kind of writing. Anyway, yeah.
But maybe we should tell the listeners, because they're aware from our bonus episode about your book, but you're writing more things where we've got a lot of projects, in the works. So, even if we didn't chat so much, we've got good things going on.
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely it's involves you, of course, because like I talked in the episode, I'm just getting the Okutama Express, my first novel, sending it to publishers and trying to get it out there. And it includes some of your illustrations. So it's definitely our project, and I'm looking forward to it. And we're working on getting the poetry picture book that we've been working on for the last maybe, has it been like 9 months?
I'd say roughly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been fun. So it's a lot of different projects and a lot of other things I wanted to publish. And yeah, I've also started, also my second novel, basically. So it's been fun. It's been a great month. Just very busy and the thing is, I think when I start getting into writing, I become quite isolated, maybe not in a bad sense, but I do become kind of my own little island, and I don't really talk to that many people, to be honest. Like I just talk to my mom who's nearby, and to my partner who I live with, and those are the only two people, the only two.
Look, PJ, we can make a deal here. We can make a deal. If you're too busy at any point, if you're ever too busy to talk, just send me a selfie with that sexy hair, and then I'll feel like that's something.
Oh well, then look, I'll do that indeed. All right, that could be maybe something for the fans. Maybe some pictures with signatures, or fancy hair.
Signed 8x10s. I heard that in the 80s, that was a really good way to make money. Just signed 8x10s, yeah.
Okay.
You can sell those through a catalog, door to door,
I think that's a Japanese thing still. I've seen that in Japan. There you go. They're living in the 80s in Japan. Did you know that? When I was there, do you know what's really in Japan?
What?
Cassette players. They're big into
really?
Cassette players. Yeah. It's a very kind of strange, forward technological country.
They might have made a mistake there because, a lot of places they're getting back into vinyl, but that's because vinyl has a really good aesthetic.
Yeah,
cassette tapes sound like garbage. They're the worst.
But it's supposed to be a cool thing, so there you go. That's what the Japanese are up to.
There we go. Why not? Why not experiment with something? I'm going to introduce our sponsor this month before we get into chatting about what we've been reading.
Oh, yeah.
This month we're sponsored by Dumas Cuckold Dating. So if you want to get involved in a dating service where you can effectively spend all your time following around a pretty girl who will barely speak to you, do some favors for her, give her all your money, and then get absolutely no result, dumasdatingservice.com, and you can get on board with that. We do have a second sponsor as well. PJ, you might remember way back in episode 1, we were sponsored by the new wave disco band Bronte Boom. They've just released their second single, and we helped them out so much last time. They wanted us to, to sponsor us again with the second single. So the A side is called "Give a Little Love" (brackets to Anne), because she is sorely lacking in the love department. And of course, the B side, Kate Bush already stole this song, so that would have been Wuthering Heights.
Okay, that would have been Wuthering Heights. Okay, I get it. Well, look, great bands. The old Bronte sisters used to be the brother who used to be in the band, but I think he started hitting the booze very hard, and he had to leave the band. Anyway,
that's what the drummer's for, right? That's
There you go.
So PJ, what have we been reading this month?
Well, I have been more of revising what you've been reading because I read it a while ago. Didn't actually read the whole thing, but we've been reading and analyzing Carlos Ruiz Zafón's oeuvre, his works, and specifically the tetralogy that starts off with The Shadow of the Wind. Now you have actually read this very recently. I read them a while ago, and you read the last book. So these are 4 books. That's The Shadow of the Wind, came out in 2001. That's, maybe the Spanish title as well, La Sombra del Viento. Second one is El Juego del Ángel, The Angel's Game. Came out in 2008, which is actually a prequel, not a sequel. And then The Prisoner of Heaven, El Prisionero del Cielo, came out in 2011, which is an actual sequel to the first book. And then the one I haven't read, which is, just remind me the name of that book again?
The Labyrinth of Spirits, El Laberinto de los Espíritus.
Right, and you have to tell me about that, because I did not get a chance to read.
2017. So, to quickly recap, looking at Zafón, so we should just point out that sadly Zafón did pass away a few months back.
Sadly, yeah.
So we won't be expecting, any more sequels or anything, which is a shame.
Which is a bit embarrassing in my part, because I have to admit, I did say to you back then, how about trying to get in contact with him? And,
we might have, I don't know if we were going to try to get a ghost or something. That's a whole other podcast, I think.
Because I said I had a solution. I'm going to get in contact with him, and you thought I was getting a bit like, supernatural here.
It was around Halloween when you said that, so I thought it was a gimmick.
Okay, no, I genuinely tried. But yeah, he passed away sadly at a young age, didn't he? 55. So it's a pity.
It is a pity. His books are really, he's written 4 novels. So the first 4 are the young adult novels. I believe that's a trilogy and then a standalone. And you've read one of those, is that right?
Yeah, so he's written 8 novels, right? But he's written 4 novels aside from this tetralogy.
And then the tetralogy, yeah.
Yeah, which is called The Cemetery of Forgotten Books, so El Cementerio de los Libros Olvidados. And but I read his first book ever, which is called, and that's considered part of the 4-book tetralogy. That is just they don't have a name really. They're not. I don't think they're meant to be together. It's just they're just mentioned as his young adult books. But the first one is called El Príncipe de la Niebla, The Prince of Mist. And it was the first book I've ever read. Do you want me to start talking about that? Seeing as his first book, maybe we can start.
It's his first book, and I've never read it, so I think you want to tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, The Prince of Mist, Principe de la Niebla, his first book. So it was published in 1993. He was born in 1964, so he would have been just about 29 there when he released that, which will be my age in April. So hopefully if I can release Okutama Express, it would be a nice kind of 29 is a nice age. A lot of authors actually, I've realized recently, have actually published their first book at 29. It's an interesting age.
I better get a move on.
Well, there you go. Behind. So anyway, The Prince of Mist is... I was reading a bit about what he was saying about his books. So he's written a bit about his books after they came out, and like prologue, some little articles. And he said that Príncipe de la Niebla, Prince of Mist, was not intended as a young adult novel. It was just he in fact says he doesn't really understand what's the difference between young adults, and that really resonates with me, because I think the book I have might be a young adult novel, but it's kind of like I don't know exactly what that means still. Like, because for me, like, just a good book just resonates with teenagers and adults, doesn't matter what. And the thing is, now, the thing about WA and literature, the only thing I can get about it is that the language is very often direct. It's slightly less loquacious, and usually the word count is less, which are all good things. You see, I think actually if you're intending to write a book, you should go more for the YA. You should reduce a bit. And that's the way, when I read Prince of Mist, it was that kind of book. It was just a very well-written, compact book.
Are the themes a little bit lighter in the young adult, one?
Yeah, so I'm going to get to you about that now. So it's 221 pages, I think, the original book. Came out in 1993, translated into English 2010, so after the success of his adult books. So yeah, this is interesting, and I'd like to get back to Prince of Mist after we mentioned the other books, because it relates. You'll be interested about this. It kind of relates to the later books. They're all kind of interconnected in some sense. But the themes are not lighter. No, they're not lighter. I mean, he's not
right.
For those guys, why are we talking about Carlos Ruiz Zafón? Because he's very much a kind of a new Gothic author. Don't you think? It's kind of like he's like the excellent example of what Gothic literature could have become, maybe, and didn't quite always achieve. We talk about that in a second. The themes are not lighter. We'll talk about the themes in a second. Just to give you guys an idea about why you should read Prince of Mist, because you might think, oh, it's a kid's book. It's not really kids' books in some sense. I feel like it was very serious and very dark. It is considered more of a horror novel than anything. It's about a boy, as many of his stories are. They're kind of often about boys and young men. A boy called Max Carver, set during the Second World War. He moves with his family to away from the city, to get away from the war, to the seaside. All right. And the cover of the book is kind of a lighthouse anyway. So there's a lighthouse in that village, set somewhere in England. So it's very much a kind of a bit of a romantic English landscape. Not really, I think, what an Englishman would write about. But it's kind of like a Spanish person writing about England, is my impression. It's not supposed to be a bad thing. Kind of like that. And it's basically about Max. He goes with his family, he goes to the seaside, and the war is in the background. So I love that, actually. I mean, I did that in my book as well. The Second World War is in the background. There's not a main theme. So for me, it resonates a lot. I always like those kind of stories. I'm a bit obsessed with the Second World War. It's the one war that like holds a fascination with me more than any other war, because my granddad was, my grandparents, my German grandparents were in it, of course. And it's in the background, so that's very important. And it's kind of like, it's a bit of a Freudian sort of story, in the sense of, you get the impression that there's a bit of supernatural elements happening there. I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's basically about him becoming friends with a boy called Roland, and who's as old as Max's older sister called Alicia. And they go diving near the lighthouse, and they find some interesting, horrific sort of things happening to them. And this is basically what it's all about. And it's very similar to the themes of the adult books, in the sense of like suppression, a secret. So I think Zafón is kind of fascinated by that Gothic theme of suppressing your fear, suppressing as something scandalous, something that society doesn't accept, and then it coming out through horrific means, through monsters, I suppose. It's not really a monster novel, though. I'm not really going to say how it's not, and it's not such a graphic novel, I would say. It's more of an atmospheric novel more than anything. Kind of a classic Gothic tale.
I mean, the
Yeah,
atmosphere is, that atmospheric novel, as you say, that kind of neo-Gothic style, that is something that he does really well. And you can
it
always
does.
tell a good author by their world building.
Oh, yeah.
You read Dickens or you read Agatha Christie, and you feel like everything took place in the same world. And at least with the tetralogy that I've read, obviously it is a direct sequel, but he creates this amazing world, this Barcelona that is
Yeah,
it's very distinct, and it has it has that kind of Gothic atmosphere about it, and I think it's very, very superbly crafted.
oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, like, would you like to now move on? We can move. I'd like to go back actually to Prince of Mist because I haven't read the other, kids novels, not kids novels, but we're going to say young adult novels. But I have something interesting to say to that after we talk about the other novels. So maybe we'll talk about
Okay.
now, actually, is big masterpiece kind of like, right? The whole 4-book universe of, excuse me, the name, the Cemetery of Forgotten Books.
Cemetery of Forgotten Books, yep. El Cementerio de los Libros Olvidados. Now, we should stress as well, I mean, for anyone that isn't aware, yes, these are Spanish books, and I read them in Spanish, but of course they are all available now in English translation, so you can
Yeah,
get
yeah.
those.
After the success of The Shadow of the Wind, then they tried
Pretty much,
translating
yeah.
other
From
stuff as
that
well.
point, they were all translated.
Exactly.
Now, I have 4 or 5 Zafón books sitting beside me here. I do not have The Shadow of the Wind because I borrowed it from someone and gave it back, and then it was so good that I got into all the others. So, I mean, it's the first one. It's now considered one of the best-selling books of all time, right?
Yeah, right. I believe it's sold more than 50 million copies worldwide. Yeah, and
And
it's
it is
published by
selling worldwide, yeah.
and Penguin Books published it in the UK, for example. I mean, it's a big hit. Yeah, totally.
So this tells the story of Daniel Sempere. Essentially, he works in a bookshop, Sempere y Hijos, so it's Sempere's and Sons. Essentially, this is a bookshop that's been in the family generations, and he's there. He's the kid, and his dad obviously is running the bookshop, and his dad before him had the bookshop as well.
Yeah. Basically, that's the story. Yeah. So it starts off with that kind of. It's already now. Carlos Ruiz Zafón, he talks a lot about that. He loves to talk about writers, being a writer, and I mean that's not an uncommon theme anyway. With writers, they love to talk about writers, but it starts off with a kid who's in a kind of a bookshop, but and not just that, but he then goes to the special place, right? Cemetery of Forgotten Books. And what happened?
The Cemetery of Forgotten Books with the guardian, Isaac.
Exactly. Do you want to talk about what that is, like the Cemetery of Forgotten Books? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, so when he's 10 years old, his dad takes him there, and he kind of says there's some things that you can only see, on a dark night, effectively, and they go out and they go to the Cemetery of Lost or Forgotten Books, and it's effectively a massive, I think it's hidden away in like ruins of an old palace or something, but it's basically a massive library of forgotten books or lost books. And when you go there, it's a secret. You're not allowed to tell anyone about it. You're allowed, kind of lifetime access to it, but you get to choose one book, which will be a book that you bond with, kind of spiritually. This book, you will now form a tie with. And of course, he chooses The Shadow of the Wind by Julian Carax.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, like, that's a fascinating character, Julian Carax. That's one of the best characters ever, I think, written by any author. But anyway, we'll get into Julian Carax in a second. Important that I want to mention here is that what's really vital about Zafón, and he didn't really develop that in his early novels quite yet. So this is his 5th novel, yeah. So this is his 5th novel. So it took him 5 novels to actually start getting a city, and also because it's set just after the Civil War. Yeah, it's set just after the Spanish Civil War, which was 1936 to 1939. And basically 2 things. Again, one thing he already mastered in the first novel, which is the trauma of war and basically suppression of war and it coming out through devious ways. And so he also that means he also has great villains and also just great dark characters. But if it's the Second World War in Prince of Mist, it's the Spanish Civil War, mainly in the Shadow of the Wind, although of course the Second World War. But I just want to remind you listeners that Spain was not involved in the Second World War because it had just suffered a civil war between Republicans and monarchists for 3 years, and the monarchists won under Franco and then started a dictatorship. And there are a few things I just want to mention briefly about this because the dictatorship lasted from 1939 to 1975, and everyone was quite traumatized about this. So, and it was easier to write about this after it finished. So 2001 is when The Shadow of the Wind came out, and translated into English 2004. So the idea is you could now write about it. And I think the idea is that Carlos Ruiz Zafón, he's a Catalonian author. And like, if you've been followed in politics, Catalonia is, most of Catalonia doesn't want to be Spain. Now that's very controversial, but let's just say half of Catalonia doesn't want to be Spain. And I think Carlos Ruiz Zafón is obviously more of the Catalonian, at least kind of feels more compassion towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, cultural independence at least. And I'm not sure what political. I'm not sure what his political views were. But the thing is, he already mastered in the first one, and he already did it well in the first one and mastered it in this book, The Shadow of the Wind, the trauma of war, and how like what is suppressed and then comes out. But what he really mastered in the fifth novel is getting an actual city, and talk about the city. So the city of Barcelona is extremely important. I mean, wouldn't you agree? In the at least in the first three books. I don't know about the fourth one.
I mean, I think the fourth one as well. Now there are some parts of the fourth one that actually we do venture a little bit to Madrid, but then we come back to Barcelona. The fourth one, I mean, we'll get to it in a minute because it's almost 2 books, separate.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think certainly the first 3 books. I don't know if they could have taken place anywhere other than not just Barcelona, but Zafón's interpretation of Barcelona.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's kind of like it's a very much a personal Barcelona, but just it's based on memories. So just like James Joyce did with Ulysses, where he portrayed Dublin in 1904, those were memories. Those were based on letters. James Joyce was only like was maybe about 26, and at that 1904, but he wrote Ulysses a lot later, so he just remembers it. And of course, Carlos Ruiz Zafón was born in the 60s. He did not live in this Barcelona, but I feel like it's kind of like he's dealing with the Barcelona stories his parents might have told him, or even his grandparents.
Yeah.
Like so many great books, like 100 Years of Solitude with Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That's also just telling the story of old sort of Colombia, but it's a personal account. It's not a memory account, so that's what makes it slightly fantastic, just like this one is fantastic as well, not realistic necessarily. So I love that. Yeah, just gotta say that.
Yeah, when we say not realistic, I mean, yeah, some of the things that happen are a little bit extreme, but obviously with me not having been in Barcelona at that time, I don't know, how realistic some of those things, were or wouldn't be. But I do like a novel that, although not realistic, at least is set, or at least begins in a real place, because it does give you that time. And I do like that.
And just like Ulysses, but not as overdone. Like in Ulysses, is basically there is a map of Barcelona. My copy of the third book actually has a map of Barcelona on the back. So some of them have an actual map of Barcelona, or how it was in that time. And just like James Joyce, he mentions specific streets you can actually go to and revisit. And that's a very great thing, because that's what they do in Bloomsday to celebrate Ulysses. They actually go to the actual streets. And I wish they're probably going to start, now that he's passed on, they're probably going to start someday of the year where everyone celebrates in Barcelona. I love that, because that means you can actually go to the real place and say like, oh, this place was here. I have to say this also...
Simperian's bookshop, right?
Well, even if it doesn't exist, you can definitely find it. It's there in its essence. It's there in like different books, and I love that. And I think possibly that inspired me was my books as well. They are usually real places actually you can actually go to. So I love that as well. But anyway, let's get back to the story. Seeing that you've read it more recently, would you like to tell more?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Now, the first one, it's been a year since I've read it, but the others I've read more recently.
Yeah,
But to quickly touch on a couple of the other characters, I mean, we've got Isaac, who I said is the guardian of the library,
yeah.
of the cemetery of lost books. We don't know an awful lot about Isaac. We learn a little bit more as the books go on. But the interesting thing about him is, although these books are sequels and prequels and they're all set in different time periods, Isaac is always there. He is a constant guardian of
Mm,
the cemetery, and
right, yeah.
he just has that kind of famous line when anyone walks in, and it's
Oh,
just
yeah.
Bienvenido al cementerio de los libros olvidados. Welcome to the cemetery of lost books. And that's what he says in, I think, all four novels. No matter
All
who
right,
he's
yeah.
talking to, that's just his intro. Sort of ominous almost, but actually no, he's a very sympathetic character when you get to know him a bit, and we meet his daughter in the first novel as well.
That's right,
Um,
yeah. And also, like all these names, they're not really, not all of them, but a lot of these names are not really Spanish. A lot of these names are Catalonian, which is a separate language. And Isaac for me, like even the name, that sounds like a really ancient Jewish name. Like it sounds like a kind of name I would expect from 16th century Spain. So I
yeah,
love
it
all
didn't
this
really
kind of.
strike me as a kind of a normal, Spanish name.
So I love that actually. But yeah. So basically, his life changes. Daniel Sempere's life changes when he receives Julian Carac's book, The Shaft of the Wind. It just changes, right?
Yeah, and receives is an interesting way to say it because he doesn't pick it out. The idea is when you're in
Mhm.
the cemetery or the library, the book picks you. You receive the book.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
It's not that you go hunting for hours and you pick out the book. It's
yeah,
supposed to be. It is an obvious choice. This book is just sitting waiting for you.
yeah, yeah.
And of course, that's by Julian Carax.
Uh,
To quickly cover another character because he is important throughout the whole series, it
uh,
is a chap who we meet a little bit through the book, and he becomes Daniel's friend, and really he becomes Daniel's best friend throughout the tetralogy, Fermin
mhm.
Romero de Torres.
Who is very Quixote-esque, by the way. Like not reading Don Quixote. I think I was influenced by Don Quixote. His character, or possibly even Sancho from the two main characters from Quixote. That's a very sort of unusual kind of character he's not living in the real world. He's kind of
Yeah,
like he's a tramp at first, but obviously he has a history that maybe we're not going to get
yeah,
too
there
much
is
into.
that element where he doesn't quite live in the real world, and
Yeah,
to be
yeah, but
honest, to some extent, even as he grows up, that kind of remains. To some extent, he's always a kind of slightly more playful character.
yeah, even when
Um,
he matures like it. Yeah,
yeah, even when he matures, and even when very very minor spoiler, but even when he eventually marries, he's eventually he still kind of keeps that
Hmm.
kind of fun character.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Totally.
and then I guess we need to say something about Fumero now, Francisco Javier
Right.
Fumero. He was essentially he's a police inspector, a very rogue police inspector, and again he appears in all four novels. He's one of the key antagonists. He's just the
Hmm.
kind of police guy that everyone's afraid of, and when you're in there, if the police get you, that's the threat. It's if you don't cooperate, we'll send you to Fumero.
And that's an interesting. Now, growing up in Spain, I can tell you that. Now, I don't mean to be harsh, but the Guardia Civil, so the civil guard, so that's really the civil guard is not the police per se, but the civil guard is something like it. Without getting controversial, it's I'm not. No, I can't compare it now, but it's basically the darker side of the police, at least during Franco's dictatorship, because Guardia Civil were, in a sense, kind of a Gestapo back then. They're very different now. No, they really are. I'm not just saying that to be diplomatic, but back
Mhm.
then it was the Gestapo equivalent
Right.
because they were, and as is shown in the book, they were people who just took people who weren't conformed to the government, and that lasted up until Franco's dictatorship, 1975, and it sort of lasted a bit longer. And there's a lot of fear. And I'll be honest with you, I am still feared when I see Guardia Civil because even I, who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, have a bit of there's a collective trauma, let's just say, about these people. Now they've completely changed. They're really just the same as the police, completely changed. They're completely normal, but it's got a very dark history. And this is what Carlos Ruiz Zafón explores was this character, because he was Inspector Fumero, essentially is the monster, the absolute fear, the Franco representative in this book. And he's mean as hell, and he's like, there's no humanity in him. And not going to give the spoilers away, but our side character, Fermin Romero de Torres, is directly linked to the story here with Inspector Fumero. Mm-hmm. And I just want to add, if any writer did, because this is a great, I have to say, like Carlos Ruiz Zafón is kind of like the writer I would recommend students of writing to read and to learn from. And because of all the things we mentioned, but also including, if you want a good psychotic character, then just analyze Inspector Fumero. So I can just say that for all of you readers, one of the best antagonists ever. I mean, don't you agree? I thought it was very sort of, gritty, like the things he came up with, and even the things he said and stuff, the way he acted. It got under your skin.
Yeah, I mean, he's very gritty. And what's very interesting to me is it's not just the other, it's not just potential criminals or suspects who are afraid of Fumero. It's even other police. He's just, he will just take you and beat you and torture you, and if you don't confess to the crime, he'll pin it on you anyway. Kind of very rogue, and I mean, he's a great villain across the entire series of novels, and in some he's more important than in others, but he always seems to be a looming threat.
And again, that talks about it's a universe. So I love that. So I mean, I love great books, everything from Harry Potter, moving on to Ulysses, for example, because Ulysses shares the universe of the Dubliners and a portrait of an artist as a young man. These authors, when you start creating a universe, you can play around so much, because you have like recurring characters come up there, and it becomes a lot more complex because it's like all of a sudden it's an interlinked literature, not just individual kind of books. It's interlinked. I love that. And also it's very complex. So like every character is very four-dimensional. It's not just like Inspector Fumero is not just a sadist for a reason, for no reason. He's got his reasons, and it's explained very well in the book. I thought I got a minimal compassion for him. I didn't get too much, but I understood how he became such a like horrible person. Yeah. So yeah, great character.
He's a great character. I mean, I wouldn't say, honestly, I don't think I have really any compassion for him, to be honest.
Yeah, it's like really, it's kind of a monster thing, isn't it? Kind of the nightmare you can't accept, I find. And that's, it's to be honest, like, I find like the slasher movie, it's that kind of antagonist. Slasher movie, because it's all very Freudian, a slasher movie monster is a monster you can't get rid of. And you have no compassion. It's the ultimate inner fear. It's your own fear. It's a representation of your dark sides, of the id. I mean, that's why they often talk about psychoanalytics when they talk about slasher films, but also Gothic literature. And that's what this is. It's not the first antagonist that's done like this, but I think Zafón took something that wasn't so original, but just mastered the craft with Inspector Fumero as one of the best.
Yeah, I mean, you don't always have to have an original idea to have a good idea.
Exactly, yeah. So he's definitely mastered it. Yeah.
So what's interesting is, to quickly kind of cover what happens. I don't want to spoil too many plot details, and it's going to get trickier the further we go through a series of linked books. But what essentially happens is, he's got this author, Julian Carax, and this author has. Well, we don't really know at the start, where this author is. But what we know is that some mysterious person is trying to destroy all of their books. And that's why the book is saved and rescued in the cemetery. Someone has a vendetta to burn every copy of, a burned man is going around looting up every copy of these books and burning them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's a fascinating aspect. And yeah, I wish I could say though, like it was, because I think it's a great twist. But it's there's a burned man going around, and again, that's something very Gothic. It's very Gothic, I mean, like what I love about Carlos Ruiz Zafón works, there's nothing really pretentious about it, because I find a lot of modern authors are trying to be very new, or they're trying to be modernist in a sense of back like Joyce and Virginia Woolf. But Carlos Ruiz Zafón really only cares about doing a great adventure novel, just a great book. He's not trying to be. It's not loquacious. It's not like overly intellectual, but it ends up being a very clever book, nevertheless, because it's such a well-written book with many little plots. No, I think it's a great read. It's very gripping. It could be a bit draining. I think we can start talking about the second book now, because that's the one I liked least, to be honest. The Angels Game. Yeah, it wasn't. I liked it, but I thought the first and the third book were better. What did you think about the Angels Game?
So the second one, then, the Angels Game is a prequel, as you said, rather than a sequel. And effectively, we meet this writer called David Martin, and he's sort of similar to Carax in the sense that he's kind of a lost writer. He will later become part of this club of Barcelona writers whose works are basically forgotten. But when we first meet him, he's starting out. He's got a really, really bad deal with this publisher who basically pay him to write something insane, like 1,000 words a day, or just, he's writing every day under fake names, so he never owns the rights to any of his books, and they're just paying him pennies, and it's the only writing work he can get, and he's in like a 3-year contract to just keep doing, like, it's some insane setup that he has where he's just being exploited, really, really badly. And he wants out of that, and he wants to write his own works. And he meets a very strange person called Andreas Corelli, who basically tells him, "I'm an editor, and I can make your contract go away. Don't worry about that at all. But what I need you to do is write a work for me, and we're essentially going to create our own religion."
Exactly. Yeah. It becomes a bit of a cult kind of thing. Yep. Now I've got to say, just why was it my least favorite? It's gothic over the top, in my opinion. I'll be honest. I think it's just slightly too much now. It becomes very heavy on supernatural elements, and I do like all that stuff. But I thought the first book had a balance. I thought the first book could have actually happened, whereas I feel like the Angels Game, I just can't imagine it happening. So. That's my thing. Also,
you only think that because you haven't read the fourth book.
Oh, really? Okay. Mm-hmm. I understand. Okay, I think I know what you're getting at, though. But okay, no. Okay, so I'm just going to guess now that David Martin is a highly mentally unstable character. I'm just going to guess that's what you're getting at. But okay, if I have to read the fourth book, okay. So now I remember that. Especially at the end, I can't say too much, but he's not the reliable narrator. As in the first book, it's very reliable. This is the unreliable narrator. Okay, I get it. So I have to read the fourth one, and then this makes sense, you say, yeah? So,
well, it's still not 100%, but it does bring things to context, because I got so confused towards the end of it when I read it. I started to doubt my Spanish, because some parts of the story just weren't making sense. And, and then I realized, well, actually, there are, as you say, the narrator's not reliable, and things are called into question. And, there's crazy parts where he's finding, bodies everywhere. And he thinks that this guy killed him, but other people are saying this guy doesn't exist. It all gets a bit crazy, and I don't want to kind of give any details on that. But it's a very strange story, and of course, in the end, David Martin, the author, he gets arrested, and they.
No spoilers, but
anyway. I'm not gonna spoil it too much. But he eventually gets arrested for potential crimes, which of course he's telling us that Andreas Corelli actually committed, but no one else has seen this guy.
Oh yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like so in the sense of, is he just daydreaming? Is he just fantasizing? And it's kind of like becomes a bit of a Stephen King sort of story, I suppose. Is what's happening real? Is it just his imagination? And there is a sense of obsession with a obsession as well. He's obsessed with a woman, so that's all kind of theme in it as
He's
well.
obsessed with Christina, who ends up marrying his friend. Yeah, his best friend.
So there's a very tragic element. There's always a tragic element to Carlos Ruiz Zafón's books. And
But we need to mention another female character, because although Christine does appear, it's minor. We need to talk about Isabella, because she's much more important, really.
Okay.
She's a girl who essentially runs away from home, but I think she didn't have a great home life, and she wants to be a writer. So she says to David Martin, "I will be your apprentice," and she moves in with him. And we should stress he's living in this massive, like, old mansion that he's got really cheap because no one's lived in it for 30 years or whatever.
Yeah,
and he's only using a small part of it because he can't afford to heat it all and clean it all and whatever. It's a creepy old mansion.
Yeah, I can imagine that's. I can imagine this happening in Barcelona in the 20s. Yeah, this is set in 20s, so before the Civil War.
No, we're in the 20s. Yeah. And I mean, in this point, we see that she actually brings some light and some happiness and stability to his life. They get a routine. They're cooking. They're cleaning the house. Before he was just kind of writing all day, and he didn't really know what was going on. He had no kind of perception of the days passing almost. And now she brings like nice routine to him and everything. But she ends up, of course, going to the bookshop and marrying essentially the father of Daniel Sempere from the first novel. So she's actually Daniel's mother.
Exactly, yeah. So that's an interesting fact there. But yeah, basically the theme is that there's a quote from the book. It's basically, un escritor nunca olvida la primera vez que acepta unas monedas. O un elogio a cambio de una historia. Nunca olvide el dulce veneno de la vanidad. So, an author never forgets the first time he or she accepts money in exchange for their work, or a compliment in exchange for the story. He never forgets, or she never forgets, the sweet poison of vanity. And that's basically what happens here. And Carlos Ruiz Zafón does talk about it, like the morality of using a pseudonym and creating these books that are kind of like, are they his true works? No, they're not really. So he's never going to write his true novel. And there's a tragedy about that. And I suppose that the idea also is, being a second novel of that series, Carlos Ruiz Zafón had that had that sweet poison of vanity basically thrown at him, in buckets. So he must have felt also that he might have been losing himself as an author. And the idea is with Julian Carax, who's mentioned in the first book, who wrote the original, The Shadow of the Wind, and David Martin. They're both basically novelists who write, let's just say, kind of cheap Gothic books, similar to, I suppose, what these books are, but just cheaper and kind of, whatever the term is, the 5p books. But Julian Carax stayed true to himself. But something changes in him. I can't say what it is.
I think they were writing what we would have called old English books would have been called something like penny dreadfuls.
Penny dreadfuls, that's the one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What about the third and the fourth book?
So the third book I read last month. We should stress the first two books are in and around the 600-page mark. They're more or less the same length. They get the same kind of treatment. This third book is very short. Comparatively, it's only half the length. It's it's a half installment. It's only about 300 pages, and it is, in my opinion, the weakest in the series.
Oh, really? Okay.
Not a lot really happens in it, but what it does is it links the first two books together. So it effectively takes place between those two books. We get a bit of backstory for our side character, Fermin Romero de Torres. And it turns out that he was actually previously in a prison, in the same prison as David Martin, who kind of essentially.
And it does actually take place after the first book, but basically it links the two stories. Yeah, and that's one thing
I should stress, it takes place after, but with a lot of flashbacks that take place in between. Yeah.
And the thing is, it talks about history again. So it does mention an actual place, Montjuic Castle, or Castel de Montjuic, or Castillo de Montjuic in Spanish. And Yeah, basically this place is mentioned, I think, in all three places. There's an actual place. There's a military fortress that dates back to 1640. And it's now it's just like a place people visit to. But what you got to understand is that after the Spanish Civil War, or maybe during, I think, the end of the Civil War, this place was used to keep political prisoners, meaning Republicans at that time. And basically, it's mentioned a lot in the third novel and a bit in the first and second. But I only actually understood what this place was until I read the third novel. So I like that he's explained the history. I thought this was just a normal castle. I did hear about it before. But no, this was a place where torture and a few of our characters, not just one, two characters at least, if I remember correctly, were imprisoned in. And it's brilliantly described. Interesting enough, Count of Monte Cristo is mentioned in the third novel.
It
and
is.
Mondri Castle is kind of a Count of Monte Cristo kind of place. So, yeah. So again, Dumas, there you go. It's kind of mentioned in the book.
You know what? On my bookshelf is the Count of Monte Cristo, which I need to read in the next month or two. It's like 1,200 pages. It's insane, but I'll get to it. So I mean, I'm not going to say a lot about the third book. The only other thing I want to mention is the jailer is a chap called Mauricio Valls, and he will become actually more important in the fourth book.
Oh right,
but he's the jailer, and he's telling David Martin, "I want you to write for me while you're in prison."
Yeah, I remember that. So yeah. Yeah, so basically it's left off with kind of like on a loose end. Now tell me about...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead, you.
I was just going to say, as far as we know, it seems like they can just imprison anyone they want. It's just anyone that Valls kind of wants to have in his prison, he can just have there indefinitely.
But that's not far-fetched. That's Spain and that era. That's Spain, Franco era. Could do what you want. It's like Mussolini, Italian. It's like Mussolini in Italian, Mussolini, Italy, or Hitler, Germany. Not as extreme, but it's still kind of that direction. It's dictatorship, definitely. So tell me and us about the fourth book, but please no spoilers because I really
so I'm not going to talk a lot about the fourth book because although in my opinion it is actually the best,
really, okay,
it's I don't want to. It's the sequel to all three, so I don't want to spoil much. The fourth book is almost two books. So we start out in Madrid with a girl who is not exactly a cop, maybe like an FBI type equivalent, and she's called Alicia. And she's working for a chap called Leandro. And he basically says, what has happened is Alicia, had a bad upbringing. She's an orphan. And this cop kind of got her, this guy Leandro, who's like an FBI leader or whatever. And he got her and he basically said, work for me. And she's just been working for him most of her adult life. And so he says to her at the start of this book, one last job and I will let you go. I will give you your freedom. But you have to do this job with an actual police. We're not going to kind of go renegade on this one. So they bring in a policeman called Vargas, and she has to work with him. And she's used to working alone, but I mean, they settle that easily enough.
Okay, interesting.
And although he does appear a little bit at the beginning, the main villain is not any longer Fumero. We have a new cop called Hendaya. And there's a line in the book where Hendaya says, you might remember my friend Fumero. He taught me everything I know, but but he's worse, and his torture is extreme. I mean, he's cutting people's hands off and,
So who is worse? The new guy, huh? Okay.
The new guy, yeah. He'll just cut your hand off. He'll torture your genitals. He will, hit the mom in front of the kids, things like that. Like he's just really extreme,
Wow, okay.
And he's the new villain, and he's at times after Alicia because he wants, he's the cop, but at the same time, everyone's afraid of him, even the FBI girl. Do you know what I mean? Like he's just, no one wants to get involved with this guy.
Yeah, that's very Spanish. I feel like, because again, like the Guardia Civil nowadays, they're just fine. But I mean, like back in the days, they were probably also fine, but there were definitely a few radicals, just as in all these dictatorships, there are a few fanaticos, who did this. As a Catalonian, I think Carlos Ruiz Zafón might have been more sensitive to this violence. I think a Madrid author would have portrayed everything quite differently to Catalonia because Catalonia was repressed. It had always been repressed.
Yeah.
And definitely during Franco era, because Franco era was all about the monarchy and about Spain, and Catalonia was all about the Republic and about not belonging to Spain. So it's interesting that it's Barcelona in the Civil War. It's a lot more important. Yeah.
Well, they're being tailed by a chap called Ruvira, who's a really rookie cop that someone's basically sent to tail them while they do their investigations. That's going to
Right.
become important, but I'm not going to say why.
Okay.
But what is their mission? A certain politician by the name of Mauricio Valls, former jailer,
Yeah. Okay.
has been kidnapped, and they want to get him back, or do they?
Right.
So
okay.
her task is to find him, and that's the story of the first half of the novel. And of course, they end up moving from Madrid to Barcelona. And then the second half of the novel is effectively the sequel to the first half, plus all of the other books. So we start to see the Sempere and Sons bookshop. We see Daniel Sempere and Fermin Romero de Torres. They talk a lot about Isabella, about David Martin, that whole story. Everything just comes together in this unbelievable way. And it turns out that there are more links between some of the characters, and I'm not going to say who or why, but there are more links between people than you would have thought. And it almost gets a bit Victorian in the sense that the coincidences are almost too good, in once or twice, but it's a lot of links between the characters. There's one thing this book does that I don't like, and that is it answers the questions of the second book. Maybe you would like that since you're currently not sure how you feel about the second book, but it answers those questions quite definitively in a way that I prefer the mystery almost.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean. No, I get it, yeah.
But yeah, it all kind of comes to a head, and then the story takes incredible twists. I mean, there's an underlying story about what is happening in that prison and why, Valls has been kidnapped. That is shocking and crazy, and I'm not gonna say what it is, but it's things do get quite gothic and quite intense.
Now, and I just want to mention this. I think that a lot of my favorite books, they're basically, so I've talked about 100 Years of Solitude, for example. They're basically, and this whole kind of series of books, basically it's the stories you hear as a kid, I feel. Because especially my dad told me a lot of stories about his life and about lives of others, and my grandparents and my German grandparents particularly. I mean, for some reason, those three come in mind. A lot of stories, and I realize now that I've started writing, a lot of these stories are coming out. So basically, storytellers, they're basically, I feel like a storyteller, no matter how original he or she is a compiler of stories in the romantic sense that the Grimm brothers were, for example. So like that romantic sort of folktale collector. In a sense, a lot of these great books are done the same. I think Carlos Ruiz Zafón joins those group of folk kind of scientists. So like a collector of anecdotes, because I'm sure it resonates with a lot of stories that I've heard and facts that these are basically stories he must have heard as a child from his grandparents, from people in Barcelona, as an adult as well. But I feel like as a child especially, because I know that, for example, Dostoevsky, he was very traumatized when a girl got raped in front of him by an adult drunk guy. And that kind of and I love Dostoevsky novels. There's a theme of old man sexually wanting a child. It's very traumatic. And I think it's all basic, these kinds of books that expel the trauma, the collective trauma, the individual trauma. And this is basically Barcelona has been traumatized. Now it's going to the psychoanalyst. And 4 books have come out of it. That's what I love about it.
I mean, it comes across as effectively a broken city at times. Yeah.
I love it. And I want to give you the ultimate twist. Here's the ultimate twist. This is what you're going to love. And I think this is why, if you're going to get Carlos Ruiz Zafón, you might as well just buy all his 8 books plus a book of short stories, 9 books. Because
I'm going to mention the short stories in a moment, by the way, but yeah, continue.
Because the Juvenile trilogy, or the trilogy, the tetralogy as well, 4 books for young adults. Carlos Ruiz Zafón said these are books that essentially Julian Carax, remember, listeners, Julian Carax, the author of the original Shadow of the Wind book in the first book, who appears as a character. He appears as a character. He's a novelist, a kind of a supernatural novelist, that Penny Dreadfuls. Carlos Ruiz Zafón said that his first 4 books for young authors, for young readers, are essentially the kind of books Julian Carrick would have written. And this is why I think when I read that, I realized that makes sense, because there is more of a supernatural element in these 4 books. It's easier to read, they're shorter. So it is a Penny Dreadful sort of story and quantity of pages. They're short books. It was also nice, I suppose. Quite tightly written. And definitely.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they tend to be historic. So that all of his books, I think all of his books actually are set in the past. Maybe one, I can't remember now. But basically, this is what Julian Carrick would have written. And it's beautiful because in the Shadow of the Wind, it's mentioned that Julian Carrick had written several novels. And so essentially these could have been his 4 novels and we're reading them. So if you're the ultimate fan of the Cemetery of Lost Books series, you're going to read the other 4 books because they're kind of like standalone novels, but they're kind of like the novels this guy would have written, and it just links all up to one big universe. Well, all he's ever written, Carlos Ruiz Zafón.
You've reminded me of something that I need to tell you. I left out 2 important details about the 4th book, The Labyrinth of Spirits. Number 1 is, in addition to Carax and David Martin, we do meet another kind of lost author called Victor. I don't know how to pronounce his surname. Mataix. I'm not sure.
It's a Catalan name, so it won't be.
Yeah, it's a Catalan name, and he wrote the The Labyrinth of Spirits, and he wrote these stories for his daughter Alice, almost like an Alice in Wonderland type of deal. So they're looking for his books, and it turns out that when they go to Val's and find out that he's been kidnapped, they find this rare banned book in his apartments. And that's part of the ongoing story. So it's not, although it's more of a police procedural at times, it's not so distanced from the other novels. But the last part is, and this is a very minor spoiler, but I'm only giving it to you because it doesn't factor into the novel. It factors into the epilogue. But we do meet Julian Carrick again.
All right. Okay. So there's love.
Everything comes together. But what he does is, this novel's too long. Okay, it's almost 1,000 pages. I was very proud to read it in Spanish in 2.5 weeks. But it's too long. So you've got the first book, which is the book about Alicia and Vargas and their kind of and their little friend Fernandito and their police procedural. Then you've got this amazing sequel that is effectively the sequel to all the books combined. And then you've just got several epilogues. It's as if Zafón just didn't want to stop writing. There is just epilogues, and we jump forward 30 years, and we jump forward more years, and we just keep going and going, and we see the character, we see Daniel's kid grown up, and he, we meet Carax again, and it just kind of keeps going and going, and it's strange, but when it ends, it's over. Even if he hadn't passed away, that there was not going to be more,
Right, okay.
But the other thing I wanted to mention, because you brought it up yourself, was the short stories, because I have a collection of them right here, and I read them this week.
Came out posthumously, so just came out.
Yes.
Did it come out just after his death? I think so, right?
I think it's not just after, then just before, in and around the time anyway.
Yeah.
And I have a lovely hardback cover here that was gifted to me. It's called La Ciudad De Vapor, Todos Los Cuentos. And these are just short stories, and they're not all related, to the trilogy. Some of them are just little stories, and you can read them, and some of them are only a few pages, and some are a little bit longer. But the whole book's only 200 pages, and it's just 10 or so stories. But 1 or 2 of them have important links to the series. We meet some Sempere ancestors who've been running bookshops, many, hundreds of years ago.
Oh, great!
Which is kind of cool. And we also, and this is very interesting, we meet Cervantes before he has written Don Quixote. And there's a certain chap, he has written a book, and he goes to an editor, a mysterious editor. And this editor takes his book, throws it in the fire, and basically says, "This is garbage, but one day you will write a book that will change the world." And that editor's name was Andreas Corelli.
There you go. And that's great, isn't it?
And that then calls into question all the facts that the 4th book had established about the 2nd book. So it just changes things again, because now we still don't know really what the story is with Corelli.
What a legend! Yeah, no, he's just.
And I have one quote. I'm going to paraphrase it because it's a whole paragraph in Spanish. But basically, Corelli says to Cervantes, "I will make you an offer, and my offer is this: you are going to write a great work, but in order to do this work, you will lose the thing you love the most. Your work will be celebrated, envied and imitated for all of time, but it will leave you with a hole in your heart 1,000 times greater than the glory that the book will bring you. Do you accept the offer?" And he says yes. I would not accept that offer.
Don't forget that Miguel Cervantes only had one arm. I was wondering I thought it was going to go for you're going to lose your arm for this.
Ooh, maybe you're supposed to know that, or you're supposed to kind of read into that.
No, but maybe or maybe it's just deeper than that. Maybe it's like even more crucial than like losing one.
I felt it was more that he would lose his heart and soul.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting off topic.
Corelli,
Getting off topic a bit. No, Cervantes' life was very interesting. A very kind of suitable life for Carlos Ruiz Zafón's story. Mocked. I think it was called Miguel el Manco, I think, something like Miguel the Armless Chap. I think that was his nickname. And like Lope de Vega, the theatrical, the playwright, just mocked him. Like no one, he thought Don Quixote was a joke. Like the guy just died in 1616 on my birthday, 23rd of April, and just like kind of just, a bit of a joke figure. So it was too ahead of his time in the sense of, Miguel Cervantes could have become just an author belonging to the Cemetery of Lost Books. So I think the story resonates. A tragic figure as well, losing an arm, being mocked, that kind of thing. So yeah. Well, look,
I recommend the whole series, and I want to read some of those young adult books as well.
I do. Yeah.
I definitely want to get this. But PJ, I think I hear the phone ringing. Shall we pick up and see who's calling in live to the Books Boys?
Let's do it. Who's calling? Jesus. Let's pick it up.
So you're through to Books Boys. I'm Dean, and I've got PJ with me. Who have we got on the line?
Hi, my name's Annabelle Steele. Nice to meet you both.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Annabelle.
Nice to meet you, Annabelle. I know who you are, and PJ knows who you are, but why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so first and foremost, I'd say I'm a primary teacher who's just started writing, and I'm going to be publishing my first book in March. I write young adult books, and my first book is called Being Amani. And it's aimed at young adults. It's all about a teen girl who is going through lots of usual teen things: boys, friendships, anxiety, social media, all the things that we go through as a teen, or things that teens are going through now, not necessarily things I experienced. But at the same time as that, she's going through lots of family troubles. So her mum and dad have got divorced. Her dad is getting remarried. So it's a book basically about her dealing with all of that and her kind of overcoming it and kind of finding herself at the end of it and basically just becoming, an adult in the same way that we all do, kind of realising what matters and what doesn't really. But yeah.
Cool.
Sounds awesome.
And the sort of teen mental health thing and everything, that's something that was dear to yourself, because I did read that you actually released an adult colouring book before. Is that right?
Yeah, so previously, a few years ago, I created some adult colouring books. So they were just mindfulness pictures, little doodles, kind of things I did. And alongside it, there was a poem to go with each one. And I created a booklet, and kind of, as you do, you kind of print it off and give it to family and friends. And then they said, it's actually really good. So I printed more printed and decided to sell them on to people that I work with. I work in a primary school, so there's lots of teachers who are interested in it. Sold them on, and then decided, actually, I think I'll give the money towards a good cause, and donated all the money to Mind Charity. So that was really, it was brilliant, actually. And it was good to get involved with.
Awesome. Was it after doing that you decided that you wanted to write a novel, or was that something you'd always wanted to do anyway?
I've always written things, really, poetry, short stories, novels, and I've always entered like online competitions. And I suppose being a primary teacher, because we're always working with the children, getting them to write pieces and then edit their writing and go back and make it better, etc. It does kind of get you thinking, well, actually, what can I do? So I've always done little bits on the side. And it was just when I entered this particular competition, it was to write a novel, a young adult novel. I thought, actually, that's right up my street because that's what I read, etc. So it was a competition, really.
Awesome.
First
Awesome.
novel that I've actually ever finished writing. All the rest are just the first 4 or 5 chapters, and then I've kind of gone, oh, I don't know where I'm going. So it is the first novel I've ever finished writing.
Right, so
Happened to me.
it wasn't the first attempt, it was just the first one that you really saw it through.
Yeah, it was the first one that made it, not the first attempt. There's been many. Yeah, first one that made it.
Yeah, I know the feeling because I just finished my first novel, and there were many first attempts as well. Many first attempts, and like you just have to keep on going, and then eventually it just flows. I find when it's the right one, it just flows. Did you have like the same feeling?
Yeah, definitely. And the story changes so much along the way as well.
Yeah.
It's been a bit of a whirlwind process, because I think the story when I first started writing, it was probably aimed at a younger age. I thought it was young adult, but then I think that's just through maybe some of the young adult books that I read. And then as I kind of developed, I thought, actually, no, I need to get that kind of nitty gritty scene in there for people to understand what she's going through. And it seemed a little bit older. I think now I'm, turning 30 soon. So now looking back on what teens are actually experiencing, it's not the same as what I was experiencing. So it's kind of like they can handle a little bit more. And especially kind of then sending it on to the publishers, they were like, yeah, make us see it. Let us see it. Let us see the reality of it. And I was like, oh, can they handle it? But yeah. And in the way that I've written it, they can definitely handle it. Yeah.
Definitely.
And did you find it difficult at times to keep relating to young adults and teens now that, because I'm about to turn 30 myself very soon, and I feel so alienated from the younger generation. I'm like an old man 30 years before I should be. Did you find that difficult at times, or did it just come naturally enough?
Yeah, definitely found it difficult. I think when I read, because I read a lot of young adult books, and when I read them, I think, oh, how ridiculous, this can't be real. How do young adults relate to this? This can't be what's happening. But I love it all the same. And, I keep going back for more, so I must enjoy it. But at the same time, writing it, I was like, are people going to really relate to this? Are young adults going to relate? I'm writing it from kind of the point of view of an old person who's kind of going, this is unrealistic. And there were points at which the publishers did say, make her, she can have a tantrum. She's, 16 years old. Of course she'd have a tantrum, something like that. And I was thinking, how unrealistic. No, you wouldn't. You'd get through. So it was difficult at times, yeah.
Awesome. I also found, when I started writing the novel I just finished, it was supposed to be for young people as well, because I'm also a teacher. And yeah, but in the end, it just ended up being a lot more, I don't know, it ended up being a lot more adult-y in some sense. But I think that it's still a good book for teenagers to read. Because, all right, there's some brutal passages, I suppose, because there's some Second World War history involved in my book. But I just find that, no, but these kids, they need to know about that kind of stuff, Second World War, or, yeah, brutal stuff happens to teens and in the teen world. And I find it's all very important. You can't just numb them with kind of chewing gum, pop fiction.
Yes,
that's good. That's good too, but you can't just do it all the time. A bit of a mixture, I find.
Yeah, definitely. I think I found that as well, because there are some scenes, some flashback scenes within the story where Amani she remembers things that have happened between her mum and dad, and she throughout the story she kind of thinks, oh, well, why did they have to get a divorce, and will they get back together, and as you do as a teen. But then there are some flashbacks that she's kind of denied herself remembering, but as she remembers them, I kind of wrote them in quite softly at first, and then I thought, actually, no, because if young teens have been through this, they will have seen these things that, it's not been, blurred out for them. They will actually have witnessed these things.
Yeah.
And if they haven't, then reading about it and finding out that some people might have been through this and some people might have experienced this is just as important as well. So I think I completely understand what you mean. It is kind of, there are underlying themes which are quite adult within the story. But hopefully I've written them in a way that teens can kind of go, actually, I can relate to that. Or, oh my goodness, I didn't realise that's, and how would I deal with that, and, relate in that way.
Definitely, yeah. Awesome.
And tell us this, what have you yourself been reading during the kind of COVID, the lockdown and everything? Have you had time to do a bit of reading yourself?
I've done bits of reading. So I'm currently reading a book called Hijab and the Red Lipstick, which is, I've kind of, throughout this whole process, I've made friends with lots of different authors. So Yusra is one of the authors that's been giving me lots of advice, and she's been brilliant. And her book was published at the beginning of this year. So I'm currently reading her book. It's taken a while because obviously I'm doing my edits at the same time. So I'm finding like my own reading has slowed down as well. Before that, I read When Life Gives You Mangoes, which was, again, a young adult book. I think maybe a little bit younger than young adult, actually, but I really, really enjoyed it. I kind of inhaled that book, kind of went, edits on hold, I'm going to read this. So brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Yeah,
I think I've heard of it, yeah. So you recommend it, okay?
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Cool.
And prior to that, I had finished, what's the second? The Sun Is Also a Star, so Nicola Yoon, which is again another young adult book, brilliant book. So yeah, I was kind of, at the same time as these are all books that have been on my list for a while and I wanted to read, I was kind of trying to, at the same time, get myself in that frame of mind of, okay, what do I enjoy reading? What makes me, lights my fire? And that's what I want to include within my book. So yeah.
So you're reading things that similar sort of genre, similar area that you could maybe draw from in your own writing as well, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
And this is going to be your first published book. It comes out 25th of March, is that right?
Yes.
Sweet.
Do you want to tell us briefly about the imprint, because it's the first book on #Black imprint, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. So #Black is an imprint of #Press, and it is represents your Black and Asian authors. It's a brilliant company to work with, because prior to that, I have kind of thought about submitting to publishers, and it's really hard to explain, but I thought about submitting to publishers, but sometimes it's difficult to kind of stand out from the crowd and kind of push yourself forwards, as you can imagine. But I think with they just kind of made you feel like, actually, as a Black author, your voice is really important and your story is really important. And the fact that you are tackling all of these subjects that might be tackled in other books, but you're tackling it from the point of view of a young Black teen, which might not have been done before, is really important to us. And the fact that they believed in the story kind of made me go, actually, yeah, it is a slightly different take on the story, and it offers something a little bit different. So it was really nice to kind of have them kind of pick me as the winner of the competition, as one of the winners of the competition.
Awesome.
There were 3 of us. Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And what's the plan going forward then? Let's assume that the book's really successful and everything. Do you have ideas for more, or what do you want to do, after that?
Yes, I do. I've got lots of ideas for the books, and as I said, I've got lots of started books that I'd love to go back and finish. Now that I know the process of writing a novel, I think actually, yeah, it's I can go back and finish those. So I've done lots of work on how I plan a novel and things, and I don't just sit down and start writing anymore. I kind of plan out my scenes and think about where I want it to go a little bit more. So yeah, the plan is hopefully to Being Amani to be really successful, and then write some more books, work with # some more, or work with other publishers or work with other authors. I'd love to do a collaboration with the girls that I've met through #, and do some short stories from all different points of views, because as I say, there were 3 winners of the competition, and we're all very different, but we're all from ethnic minority backgrounds, and it would be quite nice to do short stories alongside them and give different takes on experiences and things like that. That'd be lovely. But yeah, keep pushing. As I say, I'm still a primary school teacher, so that as well. But yeah, they're all rooting for me, so it's quite nice.
So they're all behind you, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. And I keep saying, you can't read it until you're a little bit older. They're like, we're going to buy it.
And you think they'll read it anyway?
I'm not too sure. I think I've had a lot of interest of parents just wanting to know what it is. So I've been very clear that it's quite, there's some quite adult themes there, because my class are quite young. But I think a lot of them just want to support, so it's quite nice, because I think they just want to buy it to support and then hold on to. I know my niece is only 6, and she's already said, I'm going to have a copy and keep it on the shelf until I'm old enough to read it.
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
Nice. Yeah.
And I think your voice is very relevant, especially if I can say so, just women in general don't have enough of a voice in literature. And I
Yeah.
find like in my novel, I was giving like a lot of women more, like, to be honest, in my novel, women have more power than men. But in the end, I'm just a man writing a book about women, and it's not the same. I think it needs to be a woman writing about women's issues and from their perspective, because in the end, it's something, it's kind of your task, and I feel it's very relevant. And there are not enough, like Angela Carter should be a lot more recognized, for example, than she is. There are all these women authors. So it's about time. It's a great idea. Yeah. I love it. And you're talking about something really relevant. You're talking about the problems of youth nowadays, and youth nowadays must be so confused, or even youth 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's really relevant. And I find the young, and like the teenager kind of market doesn't have enough books yet. So I think Harry Potter did a good job. It did target some issues that are very relevant, including death and including like teen angst. But a lot of these teenage books are really kind of like, I feel like they're very two-dimensional, So I find your book sounds very just relevant, and I like that. So I definitely want to read it. Sounds very authentic.
Hopefully it is authentic, and parts of the book, it's not a real story, a real life story.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The book do draw upon my own experiences, and I can only hope through kind of what I've gathered through my own life and talking to friends as we were growing up, that parts of it are relevant. And as you say, that sort of the voice of a woman is really important, because there's parts in the book where Amani, being a young teen girl, she's very vulnerable, and she kind of follows the crowd and gets herself into a lot of bother, and that's what a lot of young teen girls go through. So I'm hoping that through reading the book, a lot of young girls will see, actually, you've got the power to say no, and you've got the power to make decisions, and things are your choice. So hopefully that message comes through as well.
Wow,
awesome.
Yeah,
I've one last question for you that we're gonna ask to everyone we interview. If you could have written one classic, it can be a modern classic if you don't want to go really old literature. If there's one classic that you wish you'd written, what would it be?
Always say Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's just, for me, that was just a massive eye-opening book. And it just completely changed the way that I looked at books. I've always loved reading, but when I read that, it just changed a lot for me. And I think I've said previously, and on my website, that that was one of the first books that I read by a Black author, that I was reading while I was in school, and that a lot of my friends were reading as well. So there'd often been books that I would read, because maybe family members had given them to me, etc. And my friends were like, "Who's that? I've never heard of it. Who's that person?" But this was the first one that they were like, "I love Mallory Blackman. She's amazing." And I was like really proud to be able to say, "Oh, well, I love her books." And so for me, that book was just amazing. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I read Noughts and Crosses. I read a few Mallory Blackman books back in school myself. So she's a brilliant author. I think that's a really good choice. We are going to quickly end with I'm going to read the paragraph synopsis to get some hype here. So it's been over a year since that night, and for Amani, the details are becoming a blur. All she knows for sure is she doesn't want to end up like her parents. So when she moves to a new city, she has to start all over again. Amani wants to focus on her new life, but when a face from the past comes back, she has to remember everything she has tried to forget. That is going to be out late March, but you can pre-order it now on the website. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. You can pre-order it on the website and on Waterstones as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for calling in. Have a really good day.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was lovely meeting you.
Thank you very much for having me. You too. Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Looking forward to reading it.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Well, guys, that was Annabelle Steele. You can visit her website, beingasteele.com. That's Steele, Steele, and her debut book, Being Amani, out 25th of March.
Blueberry. This podcast is a member of the Blueberry Network.
I'm going to take a quick moment to remind the listeners of two things. Number one, you can email us at booksboys@hotmail.com and tell us what you're reading, and you can win yourself a mystery book. Still one or two more of those to be given away. But don't forget as well, you can go to booksboys.com, go to our website, and you can find links for all the different places to listen. So that includes obviously iTunes and Spotify, but there's other places like iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Deezer, Podchaser, plenty of places. So if you don't have iTunes and you don't have Spotify, there are, of course, other ways to listen, and we'd really appreciate it if you did spread the word about those. Anyone listening on Apple, it'll be amazing if you could give us a 5-star review as well, just to kind of help support the show.
That'd be awesome, dude. Yeah.
And on the site, of course, any book that we recommend, there's some links there, particularly for our American listeners, that you can purchase the book and give some kickback to the show. And there's links for Audible audiobooks as well. And we do really recommend, if you do want an audiobook, Audible is the biggest library of those. And you can use the link on our site, and we get some pennies for that as well. But PJ, shall we move on to our recommendations? Do you have a book to recommend, an old favorite?
Yeah, an old favorite of mine. I would recommend. I mentioned it last time when talking about my dad, but I didn't officially recommend it. And that's the book Heidi. So Heidi, everyone knows Heidi, but not that many people have maybe read Heidi. So it's more famous for being a film adaptation. Now, I grew up with the Hayao Miyazaki Isao Takahata adaptation of Heidi. Now, I'm not sure if people realize that. So those are the guys who did the Ghibli films. Mm-hmm. And they, before doing the Ghibli films like Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, did a few literary adaptation series, and one of them was Heidi. It's a brilliant anime adaptation of Heidi, absolutely brilliant. And most kids probably grew up around the world watching it in the 90s or 80s. I certainly did. So that's the one I remember. But when I read Heidi as a kid, but in English translation. I remember really enjoying it. But I read it in the original German a few years ago, just before my Irish granddad passed away. And it blew my mind, honestly. It just blew my mind because this might be possibly the best children's book out there ever. So written by Johanna Spryi in 1888. And a lot of these women... now, first of all, I have to say, I think children's literature tends to be a woman's craft, I think. Generally, I'm a big fan of a woman's authors, a bit more than man. But I think just particularly there's just something about a woman writing for children that's very different. For example, Pinocchio was written by a man. That's a very different children's kind of story than Heidi, the Enid Blyton books, Pippi Longstockings. A woman writing a book for children, or the Moving Trolls, they tend to be very community-based and for the community books. Pinocchio is kind of more of a moral tale. They get very macabre, I find, children's literature. And Heidi is the ultimate, both innocence, ideal kind of Bildungsroman about a girl growing up in a basically almost utopian landscape. But utopian is not the right word, because utopia means doesn't exist. It's a real place, Switzerland. Again, she beautifully describes Switzerland, so another great landscape portrait novelist. And but it also deals with the darker themes, as does almost every great children's book, and that's basically that she is essentially an orphan. It's sort of indicated that her parents were sort of kind of unresponsible, sort of kind of like as if they just had an affair, and or they're alcoholics. There's kind of like a deeper theme there, and she goes to live with her granddad in the mountains. Anyway, just read it. Highly recommend it for that. If you want the ultimate childhood book, that's also just beautifully written. It's the best book I've ever read, written in German, possibly. An absolutely beautiful book.
It's a book I've never read, actually. I'm letting us down. I'm supposed to be a kind of a classic literature buff, and I haven't read that. So.
It's sometimes neglected from serious kind of academics, but I mean, honestly, it is one of the best books out there, I think. So there you go.
I think you're better with the world literature, and I'm better with the stuffy old English novels, But
together we're doing this show, So what do you recommend?
My recommendations couldn't be more different than Heidi.
Yeah.
It's a novel. I mean, it is an English novel. I read it, I don't know why, in Spanish. It's a novel by Glenn Cooper. He's a American. He's a Harvard graduate. La Biblioteca de los Muertos, so the library of the dead, basically.
Okay. Don't know.
This is. They're relatively modern. I think 2009 or so this book came out, and there are 2 sequels that I really, really want to read, and I haven't yet. Okay. This book starts with a chap called Will Piper, and it's usual. It starts out like a normal, FBI police procedural type book. and there's some murders that he needs to solve.
Right.
But they can't figure out. It doesn't seem like how these murders are happening. And they think it's all the same person, but they can't find any way that they're linked to the same person could possibly have committed them all. And, they've just got circumstantial evidence and things like that. And there's some love stories and, whatever else. And he gets a partner that he ends up sleeping with. Kind of tropes that you would expect. But then strange things happen. Then there are parts of the book set in the 13th century in a monk kind of in an abbey. And they've got a collection of, they've got their books, they've got their library and all the rest of it. They've got their teachings in this little village. And there's a person there, the seventh son of a seventh son, who is just writing lists of names and births and deaths. And he writes from the past through the present and into the future. And, there are bits set in the 1300s, there are bits set in the 700s, there are bits set in 2009. It just goes through, there's bits set around the war with Churchill. It just goes through a lot of history, linking everything together with I might have gotten that wrong. It might be in the 700s, the guy wrote the book. But there are scenes in the 1300s as well. And it goes through a lot of different, it's amazing. And the sequel's called The Book of Souls. And then the third one's called The Keepers of the Library. And I really, really want to get those. I don't even care if it's in English or Spanish. I really want to get them. The last book that we're going to talk about today, it's time for our Guilty Pleasure segment. I do quickly have one Guilty Pleasure book for you, PJ, by S.J. Watson, Before I Go to Sleep.
I've heard of it.
This is just a little one. Yeah, it's a few hundred pages. You can get through it quickly enough. It's one of those kind of page-turner thrillers. It's been turned into a movie, and quite a good movie, I would say. But the basic premise is this girl has amnesia, and she wakes up every day not knowing who she is. And her husband has to teach her who she is. And, every day, I'm your husband and you love me and, whatever. And, here's our life together, and teach her everything, knowing that every day when they go to sleep, she will lose her memory. You might be thinking, is that similar to like The Notebook in a way? But no, it's not. Because then she starts thinking that something's not quite right in her life. And then we wonder, well, is this guy even really her husband? And then it goes down a whole spiral of craziness.
So, guys, a lot of apart from Heidi, it's been a lot of gothic sort of themed books. A bit of a Halloween atmosphere for February.
Why not do Halloween in the month of Valentine's? That's
exactly
what I say.
Exactly, and there's love in every one of those books. I almost don't know about the one you just mentioned, but yeah.
I think every book needs to have some kind of love. Even if it's only briefly hinted at, it needs to be somewhere.
Bit of love, guys. Sending a bit of love, guys, from the one and only Books Boys. Yeah.
Now, the last thing I want to do, PJ, we received an email from a fan called Valerie the Pigeon Detective, saying, Dean, you've mentioned on the show a few times that you like Dickens. What did you think of the last David Copperfield movie that came out about a year ago? Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, PJ, but I did watch around Christmas time the 2020 or 2019 David Copperfield. It's a movie that I would call garbage. And it's a movie that if I could physically own it on DVD, I would put it into the garbage bin and then set fire to the garbage bin. This is utter garbage. And I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to do the modern inclusive thing, and why have we just got all white people in the novel? I get it, but the problem is this is a novel set in Victorian England, and it's just a bit unusual, I think, and a bit unrealistic to have. First of all, David Copperfield was not Indian, but secondly, when we have maybe black characters with Indian parents and Indian lawyers and black characters with white parents, it all just gets very strange. And I don't think that that's what Victorian London was like. And I think it gets a bit unrealistic. But that's not my only criticism, because that's a minor detail, really. Yeah, my other criticism is that it's a garbage film. I think that the people who made it may have never read the book. I think what happened is they made a story and someone said to them, this is kind of similar to David Copperfield. And they thought, oh, brilliant, we'll just slap that name on it and there we go. And it's awful. It doesn't bear very much resemblance. The camera work's terrible. The edit, just the production style, the aesthetic, the whole thing is awful. And it's like, oh, here's some weird modern camera work, as if we're watching the Grand Budapest Hotel or something. No, this is a Dickens novel. I don't understand what you're doing. This is really strange. It's oh my god, it's so awful. And they leave out large chunks and they change bits of the story and they just mess around with everything. So please, no one watch that. And if you do, my sincerest condolences. A little part of you will die inside.
All right, so you're not the biggest fan. I got that now, Dean. All right.
No. At the same time, of course, I went and watched an old 70s or 80s Christmas Carol movie, and that was brilliant. So, there's definitely good Dickens movies out there. But look, last thing I want to do is just plug everyone. Please, as I say, you can email us, booksboys@hotmail.com, and of course, click a lot of links on Booksboys. And on there's links to our other projects. PJ, some of your YouTube shows are linked on there, for example. And you can find out about the priest who listened to jazz and what was the feel-good hit of the summer. And of course, my Instagram with my art and everything's on there as well. So there's definitely some little treats for the listeners on there.
Exactly. A lot of music shows, different kinds of shows. So, guys, so just check it out and see what you think.
Cool. I think, if you don't mind, I would like to end this episode with a song of my own that I worked on called Sometimes You Love Me. Do you remember this one now? My friend Craig sang and played keyboard on this one. I was very proud of the lyrics, and I didn't think that I was able to do it justice. And, Craig's got a beautiful singing voice. He sang and played, and I probably ruined it with my backing vocals and work, but I think it's a really good one. And I'm gonna play it, I think, to close the show. Is there anything else that you want to bring up, or is that us done?
No, that's so done. I'm reading an interesting book right now, but I'll mention that next month. You can look forward to it. So, guys, just keep on reading, just keep on living. And see you guys next month.
Cool. So we'll take you out with Sometimes You Love Me, and we'll be back in about a month.
See you guys.
Sometimes you kiss me real slow. Sometimes you squeeze me tight and I don't wanna let go. Sometimes you hold me so I don't fall. And other times it feels like you love me at all. Sometimes you want me real bad. Sometimes you cheer me up when I am sad. Sometimes I feel like I've got it all. Sometimes I feel like I've got nothing at all. Sometimes you love me with all your heart, and you look beautiful like a work of art. Sometimes you tell me you love me from the start, and other times you go away and break my heart. The shadows of forgotten love shimmer in the twilight, the mists of time envelope your soul. Praying to a God you don't believe in anymore, hoping for someone to come and make you whole. Sometimes you need me like I need you. Sometimes you include me in all the things you do. Sometimes you make me feel like I'm your only one, and other times you just leave me all alone. You leave me.
Books Boys was presented by TheDean and PJ Burke in association with Thaddeus Penguin Productions. This episode was brought to you by our sponsor,
Dumas Dating Service.
If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at booksboys@hotmail.com or visit us at booksboys.com. The intro uses Driving in the 70s from the Of Soundtracks and Garage Bands EP by Trapdoor. And the outro uses Dog's Light by Bravo Max from the album of the same name. All music used is either pod-safe or used with permission.
If you're in the US and you would like to purchase any of our recommendations, please use the Amazon links for your book purchases and the Audible link on our website for your audio book purchases and help support the show.
Thank you kindly for listening to us. Please tell your friends and come back next time for another episode of Books Boys. Read some books!
Sign on.
Let me see.
Yeah, there we go. I've got to apologise. I'm in the car. We're having
no
some
worries.
done, and they're drilling really loud, and I've just been like, I've got a Zoom call.